Submitted for your approval. Submitted for your approval.
Another dimension.
Submitted for your approval.
Another dimension.
Submitted for your
Shadow.
approval.
Another dimension.
Submitted for your
Shadow.
approval.
Another dimension. Self.
Submitted for your
Shadow.
approval.
The Twilight Zone.
Submitted for your approval.
The Twilight Zone.
Submitted for your approval.
The Twilight Zone.
Hello, hello, hello. You're listening to a podcast not only of sound but also of mind. It's Time to Rewind is a podcast that takes a journey into the wondrous land of time loops whose boundaries are that of imagination. Each episode, my guest and I explore these time loops, one loop at a time. This season, I'm trapped in the Twilight Zone, and this is the second stop at 1963's Season 4, Episode 6, Death Ship. My guest today is Eric Deutch from Flash Gordon Minute and Escape from New York Minute. How are you doing today?
I'm doing very, very well. I hope that we somehow find our way to the end of the episode okay, and that it actually does end and we don't jump right back to the beginning.
Well, this is actually my second time through discussing Death Ship. So it's since these early Twilight Zone episodes don't really have any repetition within, like, we don't get multiple iterations of the time loop. So instead, I'm putting myself in the time loop by repeating the entire episode with different guests.
That's hysterical.
So this is the second time through with Death Ship, and this is again from season 4. This is whenever they were doing the hour-long episodes. So for people that are somewhat familiar with Twilight Zone, this is, at least from whenever they were airing as reruns on TV, this is one of those that didn't get shown very often. It's not until you get to DVD and streaming whenever this season was included with the rest of them as much. And I know you mentioned beforehand that you are a fan of the Twilight Zone. So what's your history with the Twilight Zone show?
I remember as a little kid growing up in the 80s, occasionally reruns being on and catching a random episode here or there. It was when I got a little bit older into like high school and college that I would actually, maybe seek it out in the TV guide or something. I definitely remember the New Year's Eve, New Year's Day Sci-Fi Channel marathon every year. I would always make a point to watch a few episodes before I went out for New Year's Eve, watch a few more episodes after I woke up on New Year's Day. And it's just been a show that, when I've seen an episode coming on, I definitely like to rewatch episodes that I've seen before that I like. Of course, it's always fun to see ones I haven't seen. This one I actually had never seen before, so I was happy to watch this one to prepare for this episode.
I guess let's go ahead and jump into it. What's your thoughts on Death Ship?
I didn't, because I'd never seen it before, and it's not one of the, quote unquote, real classic, well-known ones. I really didn't know what to expect. I just knew that it somehow was going to involve time loops, since that's the premise of the show.
Yeah.
So, when they land and they see the other ship crashed, and of course they don't yet know what's going on, and obviously a viewer back in 1963 watching it at that point isn't going to know what's going on. I, of course, knew it was going to be their ship crashed in the future just because of the premise of your podcast. And I said, all right, let's see what they discover, how they figure it out. Let's see what the resolution of this is. So obviously, no twist in that regard to it, but obviously still lots of the usual Twilight Zone surprises just you get from watching any Twilight Zone episode.
Yeah, even knowing that it's a time loop, the episode really throws a lot of explanations at the wall. Is kind of how I feel it, and you get a bunch of different potential explanations. Like I know the first one is I believe they think that they circumnavigated the circumnavigation of time, where they potentially traveled forward or backwards in time.
Yeah, that was interesting that when that was the first idea that the characters came up with, that he even says maybe we went forward or back, like you said. He doesn't even have a guess on which one it is. And that's very interesting. That's different. Usually someone in this type of sci-fi, they say, oh my God, we went back in time, or oh, we went forward. It's rare that you see them saying, I don't know if we went forward or back. So that was something nice and different.
Whenever you watched it, do you remember, like, at what point in the episode did you think that they were dead and they were basically reliving this and in the afterlife?
That was the surprise to me, because that's another thing that's not usually done in time loop things. That they're in a time loop because they are dead. A lot of times a time loop will maybe end with their death, and they'll go back to the beginning to try to maybe avoid that or prevent that. But in this case, it turns out there is no preventing that. So I didn't pick up on that until I wasn't for sure of that till really towards the very end. Obviously there were a couple of clues leading up to that. The first astronaut who has the hallucination, for lack of a better term, when he comes back, he says something almost in passing, and it's almost mumbled. So you almost, if you zone out for 5 seconds, you don't even hear him say it. He says something to the effect of how, his friend died a few years ago, and it was strange to him that friend was in his hallucination.
Yeah, his friend, that was Carter. That was the first one that had the hallucination. And he mentioned that, and he sees two people. He sees like his old friend and then an old woman walking down the road that both greet him. And then his wife, Mary, is not there, but he sees the note, the telegram that gave her news of his death. And then whenever he comes back, he remembers that, oh yeah, that was my friend, and he died in a hunting accident.
Right. And then, of course, the other astronaut, he ends up pulling the clipping out of his pocket that shows that his wife and daughter had died, and they were the people who had been in his hallucination. I was a bit thrown off by the captain, of course, played by Jack Klugman, appearing in the hallucination. That was interesting because the captain didn't appear in the first astronaut's hallucination.
Right.
And then he does in the second one, though. So there was a bit of an inconsistency there. And then they have this actual physical fight of him pulling him back into, quote unquote, the real world.
Well, as I've seen this episode several times now, because I've watched it 4 or 5 times now in the past couple of weeks, and I actually am enjoying this episode more on repeat viewings, because once you realize that, like, once you're told that this is basically the captain is keeping his 2 lieutenants with him in his afterlife time loop, that shows his level of control. And in the first hallucination, Klugman just tells Carter to snap out of it, and then you see him, and it looks like he was just like daydreaming or like having a dream. But then in the second one with Mason, he physically enters his afterlife and pulls him back, like physically pulls him back into the captain's afterlife time loop, because he is this force of nature. He is why the 2 of them are stuck with him.
Yeah, I mean, it's the captain's refusal to accept his own death is affecting his 2 crew members, and so by the end of the episode, they do accept their deaths, but because he doesn't, they are held captive. It's very interesting that, because I guess, he's the captain, he's in charge. They are following proper protocol of doing what their captain orders them to do. So essentially the captain is ordering them, not necessarily explicitly, but he's basically ordering them to not accept their deaths because he can't accept his. And so that's why none of the 3 of them can move on.
And that's not the first time that he does that within the episode, because
right.
Even whenever they're considering, launching off the planet, whenever they think that they're, still alive, and, lifting off is what might cause them to crash in the future. Mason asks for a vote, and then the captain's like, no, I'm the captain. What I say goes. And he's like, even with our lives on the line, and he's like, especially with your lives on the line.
Yes, exactly.
That really shows just his mindset, and that's throughout this entire episode, and I think that's shown really well through the performances of all three of them.
Yeah, and the captain's really fascinating because, I mean, he flips his decisions and he changes his mind about 4 or 5 times in this episode of whether he wants to take off or stay or what the cause is. I mean, the very beginning of the episode is he doesn't want to land on the planet, and because this was my first time watching the episode, so I don't know, what the big twist is at the end. All I'm thinking is, they're on this mission to try to map other worlds and possibly explore if there's life forms anywhere. And all he wants to do is not go down. He's very skeptical. He's apprehensive. The one astronaut keeps saying, oh, look at that glint that, we've got to go down there. And he's like, oh, I don't know if we should go down there. And I'm thinking, why is this character who's on this specific mission not wanting to take part in what the mission's supposed to be? He doesn't want to land. Then they get down, and he has this time travel theory, like you said a few minutes ago. His first idea is, we hit some kind of weird time loop, and we're time traveling. And now he wants to stay on the planet, but the other two are skeptical of his time travel theory, so they want to leave. Before they wanted to land, he wanted to not land. Now they want to get off, and he doesn't want to get off because he's concerned if they're stuck in a time loop, taking off is why they'll crash and they won't be able to change anything.
Yeah.
But then he changes his mind again, and he goes with I've decided now it's aliens are mind controlling us, and they're using illusions, and they want to keep us away from them. So we are going to take off now to prove my theory is right. You'll see, we'll take off, and all these illusions will go away. So, I mean, it fits with his inability to stick with one course of action, and his inability to figure out what exactly he wants to do ultimately fits in with the end of the episode, that he can't accept something. He can't decide that this is true. He's just back and forth, and the inability to just make up his mind. Yeah.
But at the same time, whatever he has decided at that moment is 100% correct, and everything else is absolutely not correct because it's not his idea. It's like the conspiracy theorist. It's like, I'm not saying it's aliens, but it's aliens. And it's like, the simplest, he ignores the simplest answer and goes with the more convoluted conspiracy theory answer, just because it fits more in line with what he believes at the moment.
Yes, absolutely.
One thing that I really took notes on this last time I watched, because I noticed that I don't know if you noticed, but there's a lot of repeating dialogue. And I noticed that, early on, because most of the time, whenever they say somebody's name, they almost always say it twice. And the captain is like, try it again. Try it again. And so I actually did a count, and throughout the entire course of the episode, there are 53 repetitions of dialogue.
Wow, that is a great little attention to script writing detail that I didn't pick up on at all, but that might be the kind of thing you have to watch the episode multiple times to pick up on. But that is a great little subliminal thing for the script writer to do to imply time loop.
Yeah. This is one of those episodes where, like you said, it's not considered one of the better episodes. In fact, like, the entirety of season 4 is generally considered to be one of the weakest seasons because they felt like the half-hour format actually works better for the Twilight Zone as a concept, and most of the 1-hour episodes stretch things out a little bit too far, and there was a little bit too much filler, which I did notice that, here and there throughout this episode, where there were several moments that I thought, this feels like it's going on a little bit longer than it needed to. I think for me, watching this several times, the biggest one is whenever the first time they go onto the crashed ship and they're trying to get through the door. I thought like that felt like it took a lot longer than it needed to.
Yeah, I can see that. And when they first get to the ship before they finally discover their bodies, it takes several minutes. And I mean, could argue is you're building up tension for the viewer, but at the same time, yeah, if it was a half-hour Twilight Zone episode, that's a minute and a half to 2 minutes you probably could have cut out, and it wouldn't have affected the story at all.
I wanted to jump to one other little detail that I noticed, and I did a little digging into, even though it's probably completely irrelevant. Like in the opening narration, they mention that they're on that this is Planet 13 and Star System 51. So I did a little bit of searching, and there's not really that kind of number system as far as I can tell. But I did find that there is a star that is, it's called 51 Pegasi, and it's over 50 light years from Earth, even though it doesn't actually have 13 planets, so it wouldn't be the 13th planet, but it was the first star where an exoplanet was found orbiting it. It's basically the first planet that was discovered outside of our solar system. And it's in the Pegasus constellation, and it's a yellow-orange star similar to the sun. It's a little bit bigger than our sun, and it was discovered by Swiss astronomers Michael Mayer and Didier Queloz in 1994. And the planet is designated 51 Pegasi b, and unofficially it's somebody gave it the name Bellerophon, which is named after Greek mythology, as he was the one who rode Pegasus. But later on, it was given an official name once they actually started naming exoplanets, and its official name is currently Dimidium, or Demidium, which is Latin for half. And they named it that because the planet is half the mass of Jupiter.
It's interesting. It's interesting. Random. It's half the mass of Jupiter, so let's. You said it was Planet B. A 13. If you kind of take the 1 and the 3 and make them too close, that looks like a B.
Yeah. I think you got something there. See, astrology minute here. But was there anything else that you noticed about this episode?
Yeah, as far as the sticking with just the whole time loop aspect of it, it's interesting, the whole thing about how they obviously are forgetting everything, because by the end of the episode we're right back to where we started. And we know that turns out they're actually dead. And so it made me think about, are they in a time loop or are they stuck in purgatory? Because the way that we transition back to the beginning is the 3 of them are there in the cockpit, and there's actually the transition is there's no transition. All of a sudden, the scene just cuts to them back having the same conversation from the beginning, noticing the glint.
It's exactly the same. I'm not 100% sure if it's the exact same footage or if they're just doing it again in the exact same way, but it is exactly the same. And in the format of this show in general, I would normally give that its own episode since it is a second iteration, but I decided because it is, for one, so short, and also because it's exactly the same, that I decided not to make it its own episode.
Mm-hmm. It made me wonder, is the captain's final refusal saying, I refuse, at the end there, when it becomes clear he will never accept that he is dead, is that the trigger point that sends the 3 of them back to the beginning? Are they doomed to repeat the loop until the captain accepts their death. And that point in the episode of the version of this time loop that we see is time recognizing that he will never accept it. Okay, let's send him back to the beginning. Let's see if he accepts it this time. We don't know what pass we're watching in this episode of this time loop. It could be the first, it could be the millionth. We just don't know. And we don't know if every pass is playing out exactly the same way, or does each one play out slightly differently?
Yeah, because we only see like those first few minutes
Right.
of the repetition, and it does, at least those couple minutes, does play out exactly the same way, where none of the three of them have any memories of the previous loop, which there's just not enough to go on whether or not it is something more like a purgatory, where it is almost like a punishment, like the captain is being punished and the other two are just along for the ride because the captain has such a force of will that he's pulling them in, or if it's something more like what tends to happen in like the Star Trek time loops, where after a while they have this like deja vu sense that they've repeated it in some way, which we do get a little bit of that whenever they first come out of the ship. There are two things that are very subtle hints, especially if you're watching it again. I think the biggest one is we get the close up of Mason's face with him like making the extreme face of horror, and then you get the sound of an explosion until the captain snaps him out of it. And also whenever Carter comes out, he is just like in a daze, and he says, "We're dead." And watching it the first time, it's clear, or at least it seems that he's talking about the three bodies in the crashed ship, even though he's saying we're dead, but he's saying we as in the three of them, we, rather than the three living bodies, or the three ghostly bodies. But watching it again, whenever he's saying we're dead, it's like that has a deeper meaning to it.
Absolutely. And something else interesting is we don't know when the crash happens. We don't ever actually see the crash.
Right.
Like you're led to believe it's going to happen when the three of them start fighting over the controls there near the end, but it ends up not crashing then. Or maybe it does, and because they refuse to accept their death, they don't even realize it's crashed. We don't know, because the episode never actually shows the crash.
Yeah, it's possible that they could have crashed whenever they first went down to the planet. It could have crashed whenever they tried to leave the planet, or any number of things. Like you said, we don't know. Although in the opening narration, or in the closing narration, Rod Serling does say that they have repeated this countless times. So yeah, we do at least know that it's not the first time. Well, one of two things: either it hasn't happened too many times, if each loop is basically happens in real time, because whenever Carter goes to his house and he sees the letter, at least I get the impression that is really his house. Like, that's basically his ghost visiting his home. And he can't see Mary because she's still alive, and that's why she's not there. But I think that he sees the note because it is physically there, and so it's been long enough for them to realize that they're dead and send the telegram to Mary. But it's been short enough that the morning, the black outfit is still there and the telegram is still there.
Sure, maybe if that's the day of the funeral, perhaps, or something, since all the things on the bed were black. But if the episode plays out in essentially real time, so if it's about roughly an hour, by the time the space administration would know what happened, send a telegram. It'd have to be at least several days at the very least. So that right there, even if this is playing out over and over again once an hour or so over the course of 4 or 5 days, that's more than 100 times already right there.
Yeah. And it could also be, a compressed timeline since it is the afterlife. So it could be sped up to where, they're living out this loop and it's happening, several hundred times for them, but in the real world, only a few days have passed.
Yep.
And one other thing that I noticed this time that I don't think I noticed last time, whenever the three of them are discussing them trying to lift off, Mason's asking for a vote, and he points out that the captain doesn't have anybody waiting for him back home. Or yesterday we talked about how, the way he said, Mason is the one that says that, which implies that he's got somebody waiting for him. But in reality, Carter is the only one that has somebody waiting for him because Mason's wife and daughter are both dead already.
Does he say that? Does he say that before or after he has his illusion with his wife and daughter?
He says that before.
So at that point, is it possible that he doesn't remember his wife and daughter are dead at that point? He still thinks they're alive, and it's not till after the illusion and after he looks at the clipping that he remembers?
The thing that I noticed this time, which I didn't notice last time, is that whenever he says that, he specifically looks at Carter. And the captain also looks at Carter. So I think that look in itself makes me think that both of them realize that Carter is the only one of the three of them that does have somebody waiting for him at home on Earth.
Oh, okay. Got it.
And that's another one of those just little details that I'm really enjoying discovering, watching this episode multiple times, which I wasn't expecting. I'm also somebody that, I didn't watch a ton of Twilight Zone. I was aware of it, but I think I'm just a little bit too young to have seen reruns. It's possible that they showed on Nick at Night, but never any of the times whenever I was watching it. So I didn't watch it until maybe about 10 years ago, like whenever the last time that it was on Netflix, where I started going through the first season, and also I listened to some of the radio dramas, because they did a series. I think they did pretty much every episode, as well as a few unfilmed scripts as radio dramas in the 2000s. I think that's about all I've got for this time around.
I had a couple of items that I wanted to call out that not necessarily are related to the time loop aspect of it, but that just stuck out about the episode itself.
Sure.
First of all, the seats for the three astronauts. I've never really seen molded seats in science fiction before. I thought that was a very interesting, different thing they did there.
Yeah, I thought those were interesting as well. And the first few times that I watched it, I thought that they were supposed to be like hard plastic, like they were, I guess, form fitted to the exact person's body shape. But this time I noticed that it actually looks like it's made out of a soft foam. So it looks like it might actually be relatively comfortable.
It makes sense for, long space travel.
Yeah, I also loved whenever they do eventually, lift off the planet, that I love the faces that the three of them make, because they all go for different ones.
Yes, I was going to comment on that because it, especially I keep forgetting the names of the astronauts, but the one on that's on the right.
See,
It, it,
Carter is the like I refer to him as he's the one that acts stoned most of the time.
yes. I kind of was taken out of the drama of the scene because I think the actor really overdid it, and all I could think of was the scene in Spies Like Us when Chevy Chase and Dan Aykroyd's faces are frozen in these crazy contorted faces after they undergo G-force testing, and they're walking out afterwards. It was just a bit much. It was a bit too over the top for me there.
Yeah, because you got Jack Klugman in the middle, and he's just kind of like straining a bit, like clenching his jaw, and then you have Mason, like the angry one, and he's just kind of got a bit of a frown that he's just kind of pushing the frown and pulling his chin down a little bit, and then you have Carter that's just really like trying to push his face back against his chest as much as possible.
Something else I thought was interesting. So the episode came out in '63. It looked like it was filmed in '62, and it's set in 1997.
Yeah.
So when they were making the episode, we're at the beginning of the real life space race. The first 7 astronauts are going up in rockets, and it's interesting that they have this set 35 years in the future, right as we're still sending the first people up to space in rockets, and they decided to go with a flying saucer as the ship for this episode and not a rocket. Back then, obviously, flying saucers were the stuff of science fiction, of course, War of the Worlds, and anything involving going to, alien invasions, anything like that.
And also specifically Forbidden Planet, because this was the spaceship from Forbidden Planet.
Oh, okay. All right. That's interesting. So I just thought, it was an interesting choice there that just kind of stood out to me.
Yeah, that was one of the cost-saving ones, because I think this was also, even though it was hour-long episodes, I believe it was a reduced season. I don't think they had as many episodes as they normally did, and that probably also came with somewhat of a reduced overall budget.
And the only other thing I wanted to call out was, just because it's Twilight Zone related, in one of the newer iterations of the Twilight Zone, I think it was the one that Forrest Whitaker hosted, I'm not 100% sure, there's sort of an opposite of this kind of episode. It stars Ione Skye, and she keeps walking down the street, and a bus keeps driving by her the entire episode, asking her to get on the bus, and she refuses to get on the bus, and every time she gets home, she tells her husband, I think I've died, and the bus is trying to get me to come on to bring me to the afterlife, and if I never get on the bus, then it means I'll stay alive. And of course, her husband thinks she's crazy, and it turns out by the end of the episode, it was actually the opposite that was true, that she was going to die, and the bus was actually calling her to get on. If she got on the bus, she would have survived, and her refusal to get on the bus actually causes her to die. And so it's just sort of a flip here, whereas here you've got the character refusing to accept their death. In this one, you had a character that is refusing to accept that she's dead in a completely different way, and that she could accept life and doesn't realize that that's the way that she should go.
That's interesting. I have actually seen, I think, just a couple of the later season Twilight Zone episodes. I didn't watch that one. I think I saw one or two of the like remade episodes. I think I don't remember which one it was, but I think was one of the episodes that had like a creepy doll. I am enjoying digging into Twilight Zone here in at least this handful of episodes. I've really enjoyed all of them so far, and I don't know yet if I would call Death Ship my favorite of these 3 classic episodes, but I think it is a stronger episode than a lot of people realize, and it is holding up, at least for me, for repeat viewings. But it was great having you on, Eric. Is there? I know the two podcast projects that I mentioned at the beginning, they're already finished, but for anybody that wants to find your stuff online, why don't you go ahead and plug those for everybody now?
Sure. So Escape from New York Minute and Flash Gordon Minute were the two podcasts that I co-hosted. As Nate just said, those both are completed, so you can easily binge them. I do still maintain somewhat of a presence for both of them on the Twitter feeds. Both of them have Facebook listener groups that are still monitored, so you can certainly tweet us or join the group, and I will be there. And you can find both of the podcasts on any of your favorite podcatchers.
All right. And as always, I am Bubbawheat, and you can find me at flightstights.movienights.com. You can find me on Twitter at Bubbawheat, and you can find this show, It's Time to Rewind, on Anchor.fm, as well as anywhere else where you listen to podcasts. And, I would love it if you're enjoying this show to leave a rating or review on Apple Podcasts, and, to help grow the show, get us some more listeners. And we also have a Facebook group. It's Time to Rewind, a time loop group where you can come and discuss the episodes as they come out, as well as time loop movies and TV episodes in general. It's all welcome there. But I just can't accept that this episode is over. So I'm going to have to start it one more time here on Friday. So until next time, I'll be here, trapped in the Twilight Zone.
Submitted for your approval. Submitted for your approval.
Another dimension.
Submitted for your approval.
Another dimension.
Submitted for your
Shadow. Another dimension.
Submitted for your
Shadow. Another dimension. Self.
Submitted for your
Shadow. The Twilight Zone.
Submitted for your approval.
The Twilight Zone.
Submitted for your approval.
The Twilight Zone. Picture of a man who will not see anything he does not choose to see, including his own death. A man of such indomitable will that even the two men beneath his command are not allowed to see the truth. Which truth is that they are no longer among the living.